Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the supposed 10 steps, preconditions, if you like, that are necessary before civil war can take place. So there's a lot of commentators, whether it's Tim Pool or on Glenn Beck's Blaze TV program. Or others that are commenting on that is civil war imminent, some suggesting that it is, and not only in the United States, but in the Western world generally. Now, I don't know if it's quite as dire as some of their observations would suggest, but nonetheless, through this, and Glenn Beck did a program on this in Blaze TV just recently, about what are I think he had 9 steps and other people had, what are the 10 steps, as in the preconditions for civil war to take place. Now, some are saying, well, effectively, we're already there. The preconditions have all been met. So now the only thing we wait for is the spark to ignite the forest fire, sort of thing. But I don't know. And but in addition to whether or not a civil war does or doesn't take place, what form will the civil war take? Will it be, like, say, the American Civil War or the English Civil War, where you had massed armies, in different uniforms, peering at each other across the divide and blasting away and this sort of stuff? Or will it be something different? For example, the War of Italian Unification was in effect a civil war, but in many cases it was just a few isolated shots here and there. There weren't the sort of pitched battles and the massed armies in the same way there was in the American Civil War. The same could be said really for the German unification, when the Germanic states, which had been a patchwork of sort of petty states, amalgamated in 1871, I think it was. And now there were 2 wars they had separate. There's the war with Austria to determine Prussian preeminence in the 1860s. There was the 1870 war with the French, which was, it's hard to figure out the cause of that war really, other than the cosmetic announced causes. But in the end, the German unification took place without there actually being a war within Germany itself. Not that there weren't sporadic shootings and pushing and shovings and so on, but it was achieved basically, if you want to even call it a civil war, it was achieved really quite peacefully, and really at a political and civic and legislative and almost a legal level. So there are different types of civil war. Now, when you look at some of the African civil wars as a case in point, where there's multiple tribes all jostling for position, then the war tends to be, again, not pitched battles, but small sort of guerrilla type militias, a patchwork, and their alliances and their whether one favors the other or is at war with the other. That's constantly changing, constant state of flux. So you've got these little guerrilla strikes on villages, counter strikes, and guerrilla activity, a few people being assassinated, and so on. So it's not the full scale war, but it can go on for decades. This constant sort of petty tribal bickering, really, at a level which is very African, by the way. That's been going on for thousands of years. Now we can look at other types of civil war. Say there have been many dynastic type of disputes in Europe, and I'll use England as a baseline here. But really, from the time of say the 1300s onwards, or even earlier than that, but there've been various claimants to the English throne, and now some of these claims have been reasonably solid in terms of the offspring of the king, and that sort of. But other ones have been quite a stretch, and have required a lot of imagination for these people to believe themselves as genuine claimants to the throne. Nonetheless, it's not hard for them to find backers. If I become king, I'm going to give you all these goodies and freebies and handouts. So there was a lot of frequently quite a lot of jostling for who was going to get the king. Sometimes you have 3, 4, even 5 claimants all running around the countryside with their little petty band of goons trying to usurp the other. Now, what would tend to happen was that one group would grab London, say the capital of England, and they would be in there and try and they would use then the organs of the state, particularly the courts and so on, to go after their political opponents or to go other claims to try and kill them off, invent bullshit charges to drag them into court and throw them into prison or kill them. And then the other guys would come in and chase the first lot out. Then they would do the same thing, trying to kill off their opponents. And it could go back and forth, almost like a conga line, like a round robin, where they'd all be busily trying to bump each other up. But open civil war, as in massed armies, it didn't go with that. It was just trying to kill off your political opposition by using bullshit charges and using the apparatus. So trying to give the appearance of legitimacy, while in fact eroding all the legitimacy by misuse of the organs of state. So there are different types of civil war and different if you like, delivery systems where one group tries to achieve. Now, if you like the globalist takeover of the Western world, we could argue that's really a form of civil war because it was against the indigenous Western population and is without their consent and quite insidious without them knowing. So gradually, the globalist cabal managed to convince and take over every Western legislature, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the parliaments, and imagine take over and have all of these politicians reporting into the globalists. They're told what to do. They get their marching instructions by the globalists, and the globalists achieved this. It was a bloodless coup. If I'm sure there were some quiet assassinations in the background, but in all sorts of other things. In an advanced society, you can upload a few gigabytes of child porn to someone's computer, and that's the equivalent of taking that back and shooting them, or threatening, say, look, you do what we want or else. And they can neutralize whoever they want using those sorts of tactics. Or there'll be some little waif of a girl, with a torn blouse, will say he tried to rape me. And there's all sorts of devices they have, and I've seen these devices working out even in the corporate world. Where if they want to neutralize someone they think might be a danger or a threat, they've got no trouble at all in producing, again, the little waif of a girl with a torn blouse. He tried to rape me. So this is a form of, I would argue, a form of civil war, a type of civil. Sure, it's not massed armies blasting away, but it's a form of taking control. And the issue is you don't want the other guys in control. You want to be in control. What do you got to do that? Is it massed armies in the case of, say, the American Civil War, or is it through? Can you do that by corrupting the legal, judicial, and political system? Is it that you effectively can launch a takeover of that political system and control it remotely, and that in effect is you've accomplished the actual objectives of a civil war. You've taken control, but you haven't needed a massed army to do it. You haven't had to go around blowing this up or firing your cannons and so on. So these are, in a modern civil war, in the modern context of the modern age, then we need to reconsider, I think, what is a civil war. And I would argue that given the globalists have successfully taken over every white Western legislature, and they all now report into the globalists. They enact the globalist-approved policy. They will oppose any of their indigenous citizens that disagree with globalist policy, and they'll put them in prison or kill them, as the case may be. They're openly calling in parts of the United States, in the body politic, kill people that don't agree with you. For goodness sakes. So again, I would argue if we reconsider how civil war would look, that we're already there. But let's go over these 10 things now. Some of them are obvious, some less so. But the loss of social trust is, and these aren't necessarily in order of importance, but I'll go through them. Loss of social trust. Well, this is obviously a precondition for civic breakdown that in turn would create civil war conditions. The society I remember it wasn't perfect. As a young man, the society I remember had a very high level of social trust compared to today. Now, mass migration has been a huge part of that loss of social trust. But similarly, as all our institutions now, whether it be the legal or political institutions or the civil service, they've all been captured by the globalist cabal. The amount of trust, or even in Hollywood to deliver movies for entertainment, or the news media to deliver unbiased, factually accurate information. There's been a complete breakdown across the board in social trust. Now, the globalists have taken over all those institutions and used them to deceive us and to keep us, on opiates while they do their takeover. But they've done that now, so they kind of, well, if we can't convince you, we'll kill you. And that really is an issue here. And that's something that the communists, when they took over, in the Soviet Union and China and Cambodia and so on, they were very quick to look, you either agree with us, you're fully on board, totally brainwashed by our bullshit, or we will kill you. And I don't know how far we are away from that now, given that there are situations in the USA where politicians are calling for the death of those that disagree with them, and yet they're still winning elections, for goodness sakes. The second, again, not in order of priority necessarily, is believing that people that don't agree with you must be endemically evil. That's an important one. Again, that was very much part of the communist thing. Hey, if you don't agree with us, we've created nirvana, we've created a paradise here. You don't agree with it, you must be evil. Therefore, we can now kill you. It's the same sort of. I'm a big believer in due legal process and the rule of law, and fewer people believe that. And I've spoken to prosecutors that real live operating, still working as prosecutors. Who believe that it's quite okay to send innocent people to prison, but you might get one bad guy because the bad guys are so bad that it's whatever you've got to do to get to them and throw them in prison is quite acceptable, no matter what it is. Invent evidence, fabricate evidence, put ideological judges in there, do whatever you've got to do, but it's okay to get evil people and throw them in prison. They don't deserve the protection of due legal process. Now, that in itself is a scary thought, but there are plenty of people out there, including, as I say, prosecutors, members of juries, judges, and so on, that lawyers who do believe that. And that's again, I think that's part of the breakdown of civic society in the legal sense, at least. I always use the guide. Say, look, okay, you've arrested the devil. The devil's arrested. I mean, the guy's not in, he's got bad publicity, for goodness sakes. You arrest the devil. Would you give the devil due legal process? Would you give the pedophile due legal process? Would you give the Nazi due legal? Well, no, I wouldn't. Due legal process, you could take the bum out back and shoot him. No. Well, in that case, you have no place in a civil society then. Because if the devil's arrested, depending what the charges are, if the devil's arrested, then you have to prove your case in a completely independent court of law up to the most scrupulous, highest standards of due legal process. And if you get a conviction, fine, then that's it. But if you don't, then the devil must walk free, because that's how it's meant to be in a civil society with the rule of law and due legal process. And this works sort of both ways. If the Nazis try and for example, these mythical Nazis that are supposed to be, if they try and take control and they want to persecute the Jews, then they can't do it. They just can't, because they have this thing that they bump up against, the rule of law and due legal process. So the Nazis just can't do it. If they're going to abide by due legal process, they cannot persecute the Jews. Just can't. So due legal process protects us all. And this is something that's lost when you're heading on the downhill slide, as we are in the West, of course, heading towards the possibility of civil war. The next thing is identity politics. The people divide themselves based on groups. I'm a black lesbian with one leg or something, and therefore I'm entitled to this, and everyone disagrees with me is evil. Coming back to the previous point, identity politics is huge, including, again, across all political and legal systems. If the black guy commits the crime, then it's not really that much of a big deal. If the white guy does it, then he has social power. So identity politics is wrapped up in the ideology of social power. So the more social power someone supposedly has because of the identity politic, the group that they're in, then the more they should be punished, or the less social power, the less they should be punished, even if committing exactly the same crime. The neutral referees are gone in society. Now, the neutral referees are the media that, the fourth estate, the media that factually and accurately report the news. That's gone. They've abandoned that completely. Look at CNN, MSNBC. I mean, it's this torrent of endless propaganda, as indeed are the entertainment industry now. Neutral referees are judges that scrupulously observe due legal process and the rule of law. That's all but gone. The Supreme Court in the United States may be, other than a few appeals courts, may be the only court that's left that believes the Constitution and the rule of law are actually applied. The rest of the courts have all descended into the anarchy of activism and deliver activist outcomes on demand. So this means that the referees have pretty much already gone from society, including the police. The police are reluctant to arrest reluctant or done. The Antifa BLM activists can go torching buildings, beating people up, harassing and interfering with law enforcement operations. No, we're not going to do anything about that because ideologically. So the neutral referees are gone. The referees, to whatever extent they still remain, are activists rather than neutral referees. Now, another one, which is very important, is no shared reality. Now, again, mass migration has a big thing, but also people, in the West have been, especially the so-called marginalized groups, have been told for, 20, 30, 40 years now that all straight white men are evil, misogyny, Hitler, Nazis, colonialism, and the most one-sided view imaginable of white society and white culture and white history is presented as being, white people have stolen everything. White people, the only form of slavery that ever existed in the universe was when white people did it, and so on and so forth. And the lies they rely on is just unbelievable. But they've created this non-shared reality. There are people out there that believe, deeply, or at least that they cling to it for some strange perverse purpose, the idea that all white people are uniquely evil beyond belief. Well, why do you want to live in a white society? Because there's lots of free stuff. But so this shared reality, I pointed out to someone a while ago that, well, slavery's been around for thousands of years. The white people came very late to the game of slavery, and they did it for a very short period of time. And then white people are the ones that stopped slavery. Oh, no, that's not true. That's not true. White people and only white people ever did it. And they're all Nazis. And Hitler, swastika. And so there's no share. And they just won't listen. They just refuse to listen. Same as when I was talking to a prosecutor about the innocent should not be prosecuted. This was someone specializing in rape. But the innocent, of course, shouldn't go to prison. It shouldn't. Not really. All men are misogynist Nazis anyway, so who cares if they did or didn't do it? We'll put them in prison nonetheless. That sort of thing. So there's no shared reality. My view is, and I'm not a lawyer, my view that the due legal process is vitally important was poo-pooed, even sneered at by a prosecutor who's taken an oath to uphold the due legal process and the rule of law, for goodness sakes. But to them, the reality is quite different from the one I see. The idea of due legal process is just some inconvenience that stops you from throwing Nazis in prison and so on. So this shared reality is, across all areas, whether it be conduct of business, government grants, anything now. There's no shared, affirmative action and DEI and race, gender, quota hiring and this sort of stuff. There are people that believe emphatically that it will lead to the creation of a socialist paradise. And there are those that think that it's a very costly and ridiculous initiative that will achieve and accomplish nothing other than spreading misery and mayhem. So this shared reality is I think a big issue. Loss of the rule of law. I mean, that's an obvious one. I think we have lost that. It's sporadically applied. Recently there was a bunch of black teenagers broke into a guy's house in America, and he shot one of them. And the I think there were 6 or 7 of them broke into his house, and I don't think they've all been arrested. And anyway, they're just on minor misdemeanor charges of breaking and entering, and that sort of things. They'll get a good behaviour bond or a bit of community service, if anything, for that. But he shoots one of them, and he's the one who's up for 15 years in prison. But he's a white guy, and they're black. Loss of the rule of law, normalisation of violence. I mean, this comes back to rule of law and the police, the neutral referees vacating the playing field. But if you look at I was staggered in the US that the BLM and Antifa and this sort of thing were able to run riot with no one really opposing them. I mean, hardly any of them were arrested. Many of them that were arrested were let go on, bullshit allegations or bullshit determinations by the court or the prosecutors. And that still goes on today. The idea that, you can form a mob in the street, illegal mob in the street, even though you're declared a terrorist organisation, and you can go around spreading mayhem and violence and destroying public property and all sorts of things like that. And many of the police forces in these various cities in the United States are ordered to stand down and not make any arrests. That's staggering. So this normalisation of violence, acceptance that as long as it's for the ideological purposes of the globalist policy, then it's quite acceptable. Now, inherent in these mobs and how well armed they are, and how they've got their uniforms, their masks, and the whole thing, and the central organisation, they formed in effect a street militia, and that's clearly not a good sign. The use of impartially and neutrally administered force must be the sole province of the state, and but yet these street militias can roam around doing what the fuck they want, and if they even are arrested, they get slap on the wrist type outcomes. So now, when you get various states in the United States, or regions or councils in other places that openly defy the federal government and openly defy the statutes and laws on the books voted by the people's representatives, then you effectively have a form of quasi-civil war. Now, it may be sorted out, ultimately it may be create a state of anarchy for a period of time, but that in itself is a type of civil war, I would argue. Now, coming back to the usual referees, there's been a number of radical Islamic preachers and various people in the Western world who've been making the most dire threats against the Jewish population, or indeed the Christian population, for that matter. And you could go after them. Some of them are even declared international terrorist groups. And they're able to make these threats and claims and make the most hysterical assertions and do so publicly, and yet the authorities don't seem to want to do anything. They can do illegal marches, they can spread all sorts of mayhem publicly, take over the entire downtown area of a city, and the authorities seem very reluctant to do anything. There's no deporting them, or people that are here on visitor visas or work visas or student visas, and also now it would be nothing for the government to say, "Hey, you're a troublemaker, dude. You're out of here." But they don't when the person's brown or black. There seems to be an incredible reluctance to do that. Yet, and this comes back to neutral refereeing. Yet there was a white guy recently who was supposedly seen somewhere near an alleged neo-Nazi gathering of some sort. What did this guy do? Well, he was just somehow nearby this alleged neo-Nazi. That hasn't been proved to be Nazi, but alleged neo-Nazi rally or gathering or meeting or something like that. And he was alleged to be there. Or was there, and it was an alleged neo-Nazi thing. So the flimsiest of thing. but he was ruthlessly and swiftly and brutally tracked down, determined that he was on some sort of visitor visa or something like that, and he was quick, smart, deported, to much applause. Much of the mainstream media was gloating and gushing over this. Fucking damn fucking Hitler, Nazi, fascist. We got rid of that motherfucker. But what about all the brown people who were making anti-Semitic? Oh well, yeah. Look, why do we? So this neutral or lack of neutral referee, this is an area I think of huge concern. If there are laws in the books, then apply them scrupulously and equally. Don't just pick and choose and cherry pick. As a white guy, we don't like him, let's get rid of him. But those brown guys who said much worse and did much worse, and from prescribed terrorist organ, we won't do anything. That would be racist. That sort of thing, the loss of neutral refereeing. So these are now I would argue that we've actually met all those conditions, or primarily met them at least. So are we in a state of civil war? And because we perceive civil war as massed armies in different uniforms blasting away, that we say, well, no, we're not being. That will be the outcome of civil war. I don't think it will be. I don't think that's it could be. Maybe it will be, but I think we're in civil war now, that our civis has been hijacked under our very noses by the globalists, and we need to get it back. Our politicians represent the people that vote them in, not the globalist goon cabal. You've been Tassus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.